And on the other side, in the foreign emerging markets, financing will be the key factor for us to make any sales. Any other comments I would appreciate, but let me also go one question to Gretchen. Gretchen, I noticed you didn't mention anything about IAEA's program, which is also fairly wide and comprehensive in terms of getting new countries shaped up. Are we still trying to kind of look at it as a bilateral type of arrangement, or do you think multilateralism has some space here for them to work on? Thank you.
The reason I didn't mention the IAEA is that I was really focused on industry-led programs. So all the examples I used were industry-led programs, and there are obviously lots of great things that are going on that are coming out of governments or the IAEA, and by no means did I mean to, it was just that I was focused on industry's role. So there was no ill intent of not looking at them. In fact, I have staff that spend a lot of time looking at nuclear newcomers and working through the IAEA and fabulous programs that are going on.
Before we go to Melissa's question, you know, we haven't talked about small modular reactors. And I'm almost getting the sense, because this is, you know, in some circles, this is the thing that's going to save the U.S. nuclear industry. And some of these recipients actually would be better off with small reactors because of the size of their electricity grids. But the sense I'm getting from our conversation today is if the big guys, you know, the Russians, are going to do all this financing and take back spent fuel, that, you know, why would any other country be, why would a new or country that wants nuclear power be interested in anything else? You guys have any responses?
I must admit that Alan took me out late last night, several Grand Marniers, and we discussed this topic at great length. So,
and I missed it. How did I miss
I'm very well prepped for this. So even though my head is you know, small modular reactors seem to be a great solution for certain applications. And there's two of them that I can think of, or perhaps three of them that I can think of right away. But there's a lot of controversy surrounding them, and for all intents and purposes, you know, we can still describe them as being, you know, paper or PowerPoint reactors until we have one in the ground operating and generating electricity. Jordan has signed a contract with Rosatom to build a 1,000 megawatt reactor or thereabouts, and to supply electricity to a grid that's only 2.6 gigawatts. So that, I think, defies all sorts of engineering logic to put a 1,000 megawatt reactor onto a 2.6 gigawatt grid. Secondly, Jordan is one of the driest countries in the world. Nuclear is one of the thirstiest technologies in the world. So to put a nuclear reactor, which is very thirsty in one of the driest countries in the world, does not make any sense. Jordan has a tremendous solar resource. They are cash constrained. To me, that makes sense that they do one of two things. They try to deploy solar technology in an incremental basis, wait until an air-cooled Babcock & Wilcox small modular reactor that's being supported by DOE is introduced in 2025 timeframe. That seems to be a plausible, good solution for them instead of going and spending a lot of money on a big reactor. A lot of skepticism in the industry, I think, about the wisdom of going ahead and investing in a large reactor for Jordan. The Undersecretary of Energy from the Sudan looking to shop and buy a nuclear reactor for Sudan, and he very quickly focused on the interest in small modular reactors as being something that makes more sense for them. In Poland, there's a huge controversy right now whether or not to invest in large reactors because they don't have experience doing that, or to go ahead and develop smaller reactors which enable them to go ahead and displace existing very dirty coal facilities, to site the nuclear reactors in proximity to the load, and to also reduce the investment risk that they face by spending. I think their estimate is $18.9 billion for 3 gigawatts of reactor. So that's it's close to it's not as high as the Hinkley investment, but it's pretty high on the range. So they're scared of the financial commitment they have to make. They need smaller reactors deployed closer to the load so they don't have to go ahead and invest in transmission facilities. So there are certain applications for them, and I think the industry and the need is there, and they would have sales if the technology was deployable imminently.
Sure, and let me add, well, first of all, I'm not sure who took who, but I happen to be an SMR skeptic, and I'm skeptical because there's a reason that reactors grew to be as big as they are, and that was to gain the economies of scale associated with a high upfront capital cost technology. It's true that there's another way to get economies of scale, and that's volume production, which presumably would be one of the driving forces to making SMRs economical. But in order to do that, you have to make a lot of them. And if we end up with 5 or 6 companies that are effectively offering SMRs, and each company only has an order for 3 or 4 of them, you'll never get the economies of scale. The approach, there's a reason that they were started in the United States conceptually. One is because we've lost the capability to make the big reactors in the United States, so there was a desire to go down a path that would allow us to build them. We can still make small things because we still make submarine reactors, for example. The second thing is financing, and the problem that we have in the United States is that we have a very balkanized utility system with a large number of relatively small utilities. Even the biggest one does not have a balance sheet that can take a huge lump like $10 to $20 billion and put it on the balance sheet. It's almost impossible. It's completely impossible in the merchant market. And so there is a driving force in finance, and there's one in fabrication capability that says small reactors in the United States. The problem is that unless you can produce kilowatt hours coming out of those SMRs at a competitive price compared to the big nuclear plants and everything else, then it doesn't have a place in the market, and that remains to be seen. So that's why I'm skeptical. Well, one last thing that I would add is that once again, the Russians are the elephant in the room. They've just finished the construction of their first small modular reactor, which happens to be on a barge, which is modeled after their icebreakers and their submarine fleet. And so they're the first to be out on the market with a demonstrable small modular reactor.
Yay. Melissa.
Hi, Melissa Mann with Urenco. I wanted to ping off something Corey said, and that was this cost always win out. And I can tell you that in my marketing experience, I've never been given credit for being a good non-proliferation player. It really does come down to cost a lot, which raised a question for Gretchen, really. And a lot of the incentives you talked about were for the suppliers. Have you looked at all about the benefits of having incentives for the buyer to buy from those that really do have the good housekeeping seal of approval? Because my sense is what you want is for all suppliers to come up to that level.
It's a great question. The one thing I should make a point is we've been talking about suppliers, and I just want to broaden out that when I've been using this term often, I'm also talking about that whole supply chain with respect to the dual use folks as well. And often, as I think you've heard me say, Melissa, reactors don't fall off the backs of trucks. And so, they typically don't get diverted, and what does get diverted are more of these other smaller things that are all going into, whether it's designed as centrifuge or whatever. So that's just a comment that I just making sure definitionally that I get that out there. But as far as looking at it from the buyer's perspective, it is an interest. I haven't thought of it turning the the cart that direction and looking at it that way, and be happy to brainstorm and try to think of what when on this list or completely different list would make sense to try and help them see the importance of trying to source from these folks that really are doing above and beyond what they should be doing. You'd think at the end of the day, even their reputation matters, right? So if you're the buyer and you're being seen as sourcing from really good places, that's going to make you look better as the buyer. So you think you, in a sense, would increase your reputation, not just the reputation of the suppliers, but you as the buyer as well. So that would be my hope and just my gut feel that would make sense. But anyway, happy to brainstorm with you.
In the back here, Paul.
Paul Murphy, Millbank. Just on the point of reputational risk, I would add, in terms of considering angles to the discussion, to look at lending policies, because whether it's export credit agencies or commercial banks, reputational risk issues are a huge factor. You can sort of separate out the financing discussion into sort of the classic, will I get paid back, how will I get paid back, and then equally important that we're seeing in the deals that we're financing right now on nuclear projects is the reputational risk analysis. Is this a good project in terms of looking at the country, in terms of looking at the capability of the host country regulator, and putting all these together to meet the lending requirements that the banks have, as well as sort of sustainability issues in terms of the overall project that are not unique to nuclear, but are part of these lending policies that the banks have. And so, even if you don't want to rely on the benevolence of the market in terms of the suppliers and the customers, if they have to finance it on the market, they're going to have to deal with these issues.
If I can respond to that one, Sharon. You and I need to talk. I could not agree with you more. We've just started this really interesting piece in looking at kind of the finance trade and who all the players are, and talk about making your head hurt. Given you do this for a living, you probably know this picture that's been shown to me of letters of credit and all the different folks involved. I mean, it's incredibly complex. But at the end of the day, I'll call it a risk assessment. Someone has to decide, how risky is that deal? Is that worth me getting involved in or not? And we've been looking at, the folks who do those valuations. I mean, even like the Dun & Bradstreets and folks that are actually out there, and trying to talk to them and seeing their interest in incorporating some of this thought process that I put out there. But
and one of the big issues that's hard to assess is the capability of the regulator. So if you look at FANR and the UAE, you're going to look at, is it independent? Thanks. Is it independent? But that's sort of the first principle from IAEA, that we want an independent regulator, and there have been comments about what happened in Japan, and maybe they weren't as independent as they should have been, et cetera. But you start with that as a first principle, and then you get into, great that they're independent, but that they have a clue what they're doing. Do they have the knowledge of what they're regulating in order to be an effective regulator? And then on top of that, if they have knowledge and independence, will they actually do something when they see something wrong? So you look at it at all three levels, and have to diligence the regulator to be confident that they will be the adult in the room, because the lenders are not going to be able to monitor the project on a daily basis. And so they're going to want to look to that host country regulator to make sure that they are capable, which raises the question in terms of the build, own, operate model, sort of Russian model of, hey, hire us, point to where you want it, we'll do everything. It does raise the question of who's minding the store. And does the host country regulator have the capability, if they're going to Moscow and being trained, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but then will they act independently or be beholden to the country of origin for everything that they do?
yeah, no, great point.
May I add something there? Sure. I just wanted to add something because the case of FANR and the Emirates is, to my mind, again, unique. The Emirates are in the nice situation of having enough money to buy whatever it is that they need, and they bought a very good regulatory scheme, not only modeled after the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, but they actually hired somebody out of the NRC, somebody who I know quite well because he regulated me for about 20 years, and did a very, very effective job. And he went around the world and got other good regulators from the UK and other places. So there is a very good cadre of people at FANR as we speak right now. The trick over the long term is to transition to a situation in which the Emiratis are actually doing most of the regulation themselves, because these people are not going to be expatriates there forever. But I don't know of any place else in the world except maybe Saudi Arabia where there's enough money to replicate this model, nor do I think there's a willingness to do this in most countries. And so that regulatory risk is a very important factor in the risk profile for projects like this.